MP3 game designer. Ed Miller.
I'm sorry, who?
Ezra Drybock.
Oh, okay.
So I'm talking about, these are the people who worked on it with me to kind of solve the problem. So Ezra was a game programmer. So he worked on the Saturn Genesis, and so he understood these architectures. Matt Tad was Matt Tad was my roommate in college. Ed Miller was a roommate or another developer at the HIT Lab. And so us four became the kind of the core people who worked on this problem. So profiling, and what it came to. And so I put the source code's on GitHub. And basically it boiled down to the discrete cosine transform that needed to go faster. And so what we did is we looked at the specific processors, and on Windows CE, there was MIPS, and for the Cassiopeia, it was like 4300 or 4200, and then the Casio E100. So E10 and E11 was, I think, 4200, and then the Casio E100 was 4300, and then there was Hitachi SH3 on the Auto PC platform, and so when we did it on the E10, we couldn't get it to run stereo. We could only get mono, and it's because there's not enough computational power on that. Then on the SH3, we also got it to do mono, and we demoed this to people. And so we basically said, hey, everybody, upgrade these things. Make sure when you so I talked to, Clarion did the Auto PC, Casio, NEC. I talked to these people and I was just like, hey, can you make sure when you're making devices, put a stereo jack, and then put an extraction slot for, compact flash. And then also you need to get the next generation processor. And so when we got the processor from NEC, I realized in the Visual Studio Code, when we wrote the C++, you could make a preamble that said, copy what's here into the binary object. Because when we disassembled the multiplies and additions in the DC cosine transform, it was adding a bunch of extra instructions. And those instructions were wasting time. And so in reading the processor spec from NEC on the 4300, there was a multiply and accumulate function in assembly. But when you entered it into Visual Studio, it would return a compiler error because the subcontractor for Microsoft was too lazy or didn't implement that function. So what we did was we wrote the multiply and accumulate, the core section of the discrete cosine transform in machine, in binary, in that section. And then we told the compiler to copy this section directly into the binary, and so the code for it. And so what that did was that, and then that worked. And so this worked on the E100, and so this was our secret, because at that time there was an ISO version of the MP3 decoder, and I went into Microsoft. They had a kind of developer day where you could bring in your code and you could try it on the Casio, the next generation, the color screen and the stereo headphone jack. Yeah. And I went in and what we did is we made the decoder, and then what we did, we implemented Winamp skins. So so what happens is we're just like, okay, we're not going to worry about the user interface right now. We'll just implement a skinning thing and then just use Winamp. And then we can use any skin online, and then we can change the format so people can skin it for the handheld Mac PC. And so I went in and I showed it, and Microsoft went apeshit. They were like one, it just to hear stereo music from this, and to kind of think like no one had thought about a music player in this. No one had understood any. It was shocking. And Windows CE was different than the media division. So at that time, maybe like 18 months. We'd have to look at the timeline. We have to do a master timeline or something. But like, there was a marketing guy at Microsoft named Rob Glacier. I don't know if you've heard of this guy.
Yeah, I have.
He created Real Networks, and Microsoft was like, great, why don't you make the Real Network player for Windows? And so we'll license. So they gave him a shit ton of money. And then the next day, he changed the format from G1 to G2. And that was just basically a fuck you to Microsoft. So like, Microsoft doesn't care about being in all the domains. They just care about not paying a royalty for every fucking desktop. Like that's their mission. It's like you can't be a vice president and then try to bring some technology. So everything needs to be built into Windows. But if there's some technology that's important, at the time frame I'm talking about, they were all like just vicious assholes. I mean, also there was a history of them just being, massive assholes because they had so much power, So like, and this is where the antitrust stuff came up. And so if they wanted something, they would just kill you. They put 100 engineers on it, and they'll just replicate it, and they would not lose sleep over it. And so the media division was this whole other building whose focus was to make a streaming system. Their whole focus was basically look at what Real Networks is doing, make a free version of it, and fuck him because he fucked us on the G2. That's literally all, and that's their mission in life. And they don't care about iPod. They don't care about music players. Like that whole, if you look at the whole time of the beginning of MP3 players and streaming video formats, Microsoft just plowed hundreds of millions of dollars into just destroying Real Networks and ignoring the actual consumer electronics world. And then whenever they looked at the consumer electronics world, they were just like, if it doesn't run Win32, we don't really give a fuck. And so it was so myopic, and it was so frustrating. So at any rate, now we had this MP3 player, and it played stereo, and nobody could do it because nobody knew that the compiler didn't support the most important operation, multiply and accumulate, in any kind of codec. And of course, we're not going to tell anybody. And so people are trying. There's another company called MPG 123, and then of course Microsoft, the media division, they have a whole codec division. So secretly, Microsoft Research, they bought a video conferencing company, a guy named Majidamir, who's a whole nother kind of empire building asshole. Secretly, they were working on Windows Media Audio, which was better compression than MP3. And so they looked at what we had and they were like, okay, we don't care about MP3, but we'll pay you $1 million to speed up the Windows Media Audio algorithm. So they sent us the video audio algorithm, and of course we spit it up. And then they were like, okay, we'll buy your player. And so they bought the player, and then because we're a reverse merger company, and so here's the thing, I wasn't hired by any company to write this. Like I was supposed to do like interactive objects. The right thing to do was to have it part of the company. And so, but the part of the company was bleeding money because all the people who were running it, basically the company was just burning money because the people who founded it got VC fund, did a reverse merger, and then paid themselves $500,000 with a bunch of stock. And I'm like this, I'm the lowest person programmer. But the right thing to do was to make it on behalf of the company. When there was an announcement that Microsoft was buying the player, the stock went from like 50 cents to $6. Like lots of people made 30 million, like tens of millions of dollars. So like this whole other kind of thing. And I'm also like 21, 22. I'm like, this is like a whole other thing. So that preface there is that there's a whole other set of fights going on that are beyond kind of like my world of like trying to build, a digital media ecosystem thing. But at any rate, we got put on the map of optimizing decoders and understanding it. Like that was our bread and butter for a while, like really understanding decoders and codecs, and it's super interesting in terms of like, and then